Today we want to spend some time talking about integers, specifically adding and subtracting them. Just because integers are one of those essential skills for algebra, and if you can add and subtract them quickly and correctly every time, makes algebra a breeze. But if you're struggling with consistency, oftentimes we get frustrated because we do a long problem and suddenly find that we have the wrong answer because we added or subtracted something incorrectly. Or we just can't keep up with the lesson because the other students are getting things done quickly and efficiently while we're struggling to figure out if we should get a larger number or smaller number. So we want to make sure that integers are quick and easy. So today, we specifically want to take a look at adding and subtracting and seeing if we can figure out some quick tricks to help us out. But first of all, what is an integer? The definition is any of the natural numbers, the negatives of these numbers are 0. So basically that means it's a positive or negative number that has no fractions or decimals. So -1, 1, 2, -2, but not 1.5. So to think about integers, what we're going to do for this lesson is we're going to think of positive integers as a yellow circle and negative integers as a red circle. So mathematically what I've got here is I've got +1 and I'm adding to it a -1. And what we end up with in this case is 0. So keep in mind, anytime we have a positive and a negative, the amount that we get when we add the two of them together is 0. I think one of the things that makes adding and subtracting integers so difficult is we learned when we were little kids that if you add things together, you should get a larger number. And if you subtract things, you get a smaller number. And for some reason, it doesn't seem to play out that way with integers. So let's take a look at a couple different situations that we could have with adding integers and see if we can figure out some shortcut rules to help us. So here I've got +3 plus +4. So what I'm going to do to show this visually is I'm going to mark the first 3 positive by coloring them yellow. And I know that I need to add 4 and they are positive, so I'm going to color those yellow also. So when I'm done, if I add up everything I've got, I end up with a +7. Now taking a look at the second example, I'm starting out with a -3. So I'm going to color those 3 dots red. And I need to add to it -4, so I'm going to color those ones red. When I put everything together, I end up with a total of 7, but this time they're negative. So notice that up on top, I've got 3 yellow ones and 4 yellow ones. The yellow ones are positive, so when I add them together, I end up with +7. Down below, when I've got a -3 and a -4, I end up with a -7. So a rule that we could write to describe this situation is if my signs are the same, we need to add. Now to figure out whatever sign to use, if you're adding positives, you end up with a positive answer. If you're adding negatives, you end up with a negative answer. So this seems to match up with what we know of adding and subtracting. If you're adding things that are the same, you get a bigger number. Now let's take a look at what happens when you have things that aren't the same. For here, my first problem is a +3, so I'm going to mark that positive. I'm going to mark the negatives with red. So I've got +3 and I want to add it with -4. Well, if you remember back at the beginning of the lesson, we said that if you have a positive and a negative and you put them together, they cancel each other out and we end up with nothing, with a 0. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to cancel out pairs of things. For instance, these 2 guys can cancel out. This one will cancel out with 1 over here. This one will also cancel out. So when I'm done, I'm actually left with -1. Now we're going to see the same thing happen below. If I start out with a -3 and I put it with +4, by the time I'm done doing my canceling, in the end, I'm left with +1. So our rule is if the signs are different, we actually subtract the problems. So if I look up here at the top, I see I've got a positive 3 and a negative 4. My signs are different. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract those. Now, if you're trying to decide if my answer should be negative or positive, that's easy. Just look at the biggest number. For instance, here our biggest number is a positive 4 because 4 is bigger than 3. That's my sign, positive. On the top one, the 4 is bigger than the 3, so my sign is negative. So let's add another note down here. And that note we're going to add here is take the sign of the big one. All right, so just to recap, if we're adding things that are the same, we should get a larger amount, so we add. If we're adding things that are different, we should end up with a smaller amount because they cancel out. So we're going to end up actually subtracting. Whichever digit is bigger, whichever number is bigger, that's the sign we use. Now subtracting is where people tend to get confused. So let's walk through a problem or two. So here I have three positives. So I gave myself 3 yellow circles. I need to give you 4 red circles. Problem is, I don't have 4 red circles. I can't give you 4 red circles if I don't have 4 red circles. But what I can do is I can do a little trading. Let's say that I give myself 4 red circles and 4 yellow circles. Now I know from the beginning of the lesson that if I give myself a red circle and a yellow circle, if I give myself a positive and a negative, they actually have no value. So by giving myself 4 negatives and 4 positives, I actually gave myself something that has no value. At this point, I have enough that I can give you some. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross off these 4 negatives because I'm giving them to you, which leaves me with 7 positives. Okay, that's a little confusing, so let's try another one. So let's say I'm starting out with 3 negatives this time, and I want to give you 4 positives. Well, I don't have any positives to give you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some to what I already have. But I can't just randomly give myself stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself nothing. And the way that I do that is by making sure that for each positive I give myself, I also give myself a negative. So looking at what I've got, I still only have 3 negatives because everything else balances out. Now, if I go ahead and I give you the 3 positives that I owe you, I'm left keeping everything else. In this case, that's -7. All right, let's try it again. So to start with, I've got 3 positives, and I need to give you 4 positives. Well, I don't have 4 positives to give you. All I've got is 3 negatives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself the extra positive that I need by giving myself a positive and a negative together. Again, because I gave a positive and a negative together, they actually have no value for me. So I still have a value of +3. But at this point, I can give you the 4 positives you need, which leaves me with a -1. All right, let's see this again. So I'm going to start off by giving myself 3 negatives. I need to give you 4 negatives. I don't have 4 negatives. So I'm going to give myself the extra negative that I need by giving myself both a negative and a positive. These two have no value for me. They end up being 0. But at this point, I can give you the 4 negatives you need, leaving me with a positive 1. Wow. Now there is an easier way to do subtraction problems without having to fill out all of these dots. So here's our rule. We are going to change them to an add problem. And the way that we do this is to flip both signs. So hopefully you noticed already that all of the add problems match up with the subtraction problems on the other side. And there's a reason for it. Each of these subtraction problems, if we take the middle 2 signs and we flip them. Okay, so here we have subtract and minus. So what we want to do is we want to make this plus a positive. We end up with the same value because we actually end up with the same problem we had before. So in the second problem, if we switch both signs, that makes this one a positive and this one a negative, which means we're adding 2 things that are the same problem. Here, our subtraction problem, if we switch both signs, we make this one plus a negative. It's the same problem we had over here. If we have a negative and a negative, switch both signs, it becomes negative 3 plus positive 4, which is the same problem that we had over here. So to do a subtraction problem, it's actually easier to make an addition problem by switching both signs. Now, one last reminder. If there's no sign, it means the number is actually positive. So this first problem that we have here, what it's actually asking us to do is positive 5 plus positive 7. Now I look at this and I notice the positive 5 and the positive 7 means our signs are the same. So I need to add 7 and 5, which is going to give me 12, and my answer is going to be positive. Notice I didn't write the positive in, because if we have no sign, it means the number's positive. Now looking at the next one, we have a positive 5 minus a positive 7. Well, we already talked about I don't like doing subtraction problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change both of these signs. So now what I have is positive 5 plus negative 7. I'm adding. My signs are different, so I actually need to subtract. Well, 7 minus 5 is 2. My bigger number is the 7, and it's negative. Our next one, we've got a negative 5, and we are going to add positive 7. Again, my signs are different, so I need to subtract. 7 minus 5 is 2. My bigger number is 7, which is positive, so I'm not actually going to write in the positive sign. Last one. I've got negative 5. I'm subtracting positive 7. I don't like to do subtraction problems, so I'm going to change my middle 2 signs. So now I've got a positive negative. My signs are the same, negative 5, negative 7, so I need to get a bigger number. I'm going to add them together and get 12. Both of them are negative.